He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I hope you had a wonderful Halloween. It was raining here in the morning, but it stopped and dried up nicely for the afternoon and evening, so haunted houses and trick-or-treating, it was all in full swing. I am Taylor, your host, and now I recall saying I was leaving the paranormal behind with October, but there are a few ongoings that have made me kind of reevaluate that and prompt this discussion with something I had noticed regarding my own child. Before all that, you can check us out on our social media channels, and if you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. So, you're probably wondering what exactly is going on in my own household. Well, more frequently now than ever before, and not when my kid was under the year mark, at least to my knowledge, I began noticing an exceptional interest that they have had in one particular spot of their room. She's still a crib sleeper, but 3, 4, 5 a.m. rolls around and she's letting us know that she's awake. I'll stroll on into her room, and where there is crying or shouts, it will suddenly stop when I get in there. Now, logistically, she's glad I'm there. Doesn't have to call out to me anymore. But it's when I'm there, and then she starts pointing to the top corner of her room. The same corner, the same spot, every single time. We have not had any incidents or interest in this corner of her room throughout the day, but after she sleeps and wakes up at nighttime, it's just that corner gets her full attention. There's nothing there. So it kind of left me wanting to look into this and ask the question, what is it that's just so engaging with this little area? And there's a lot of information that can be attributed to this, and we're going to break down a few of these things. But before we get to that, now this has been happening more often lately, and the odd time recently that I have noticed that even taking her into her room, she's become a little bit more uncomfortable and upset about it. Again, playing devil's advocate here, she's just a toddler putting up a fuss, and I'm reading too far into it. That is definitely applicable in, I'd say, a fair majority of these scenarios, which there are a lot of. But this whole situation has given me the vibes of when you are alone at home and your cat or dog is staring at a corner or something specific, and you start to think, what are you seeing that I can't see? Now, regarding babies and toddlers, they eat, poop, walk around like drunken sailors, but throughout all of that is a very open sense of awareness with a larger threshold than adults. So when we are at such a young age, our brains are nearly 3 times more active than that of any adult human brain. Quoted from the cognitive development and early learning expert, Dr. Kaylee Cook, she says, preschooling years are a time when we see the highest rate of growth and expansion of the brain, a time when the brain is truly blossoming. In addition to this rapid-fire brain activity and the general development of their brains during this phase, their cerebral cortex, which is the outermost layer of the brain, is undergoing the most significant amount of change. It's responsible for processing information and helps to develop language, attention, memory, and movement. End quote. Now let's get deep into the science here. During those first 3 years of an infant's life, their brain is developing at a rate of 1 million neural connections per second. In short, a neural connection is a neural pathway, and neural pathways are the basis for how we think, feel, and act. The more frequently a behavior is performed, the stronger those specific connections become. Now, with these pathways in our brains, we can learn, create memories, experience emotions, and sensations just through our interactions. Now, for adults, this process has started to decline. Its official name is pruning, but ultimately what I hope you can take away from this is that babies' brains are running full steam ahead with a massive amount of energy backing their development, which could yield certain unexpected things, at least in my perspective. These things that maybe they can see that we can't, or engage with that we can't. As bold as this is debatable, but we're going to touch down on the science of it again before we indulge in some reports. So, when adults look at certain images, our brains have learned to see what differences are important to notice. We learn to ignore certain types of differences so that we can recognize the same object as unchanging in many varied scenarios. In Tokyo, Japan, this was further explored, where researchers tested 42 young infants between the ages of 3 to 8 months old. Now, they couldn't talk yet, so that inhibits things a bit, but alternatively, the researchers tracked their perception of the images based on how long each baby stared at that particular image. Previous research shows that when a baby sees something they consider new, they stare at it longer. Familiar objects, however, are more often met with a passing glance. The time differences recorded in the gazes showed that the 3 to 4 month old babies noticed differences in pixel intensity and were less impressed with differences in the surface, so glossy or matte was of no concern. But with older infants, the pixel difference was no longer of note, and their vision was more in line with that of adults. But as we drift away from the scientific aspect now, why would spirits or energies be attracted to infants? I personally think it's because they exist in our world, but can see through it all at once. Kind of like a bridge. And the amount of reports from parents regarding paranormal experiences during or post having a baby, it's pretty astronomical. I have one personal experience actually during with my wife, and I'm going to highlight here that it's something that left me completely flabbergasted. To this day, I still don't have an answer for it, and I thoroughly looked into this and could not figure it out. Now, full disclosure, my wife's grandfather passed away a few months before our child came along. He lived a very religious life. Now, he was married, his wife, they were both wonderful people, very religious, as I said, very good man, hardworking, great relationship with his wife. And when she was growing up, my wife in particular, he had a great family connection with her. Really healthy family dynamic. So we're in the end game of my wife's pregnancy, and it's not going great. Everything worked out fine, thank goodness, but during that time, it was exceptionally difficult. And during one moment at home after being sent back by the hospital without any explanation at all, the TV turns on. With both of us on the couch, the remote far away, no one else in the house. My wife breathing like crazy, just contractions, just going through the motions. Not only did the TV turn on, but it automatically started playing this new nature sounds relaxation video on one of these streaming platforms. I did a thorough inspection of that TV. Nothing stood out of the ordinary. It never did that before, and it has never done that again. The only time we have ever had it was that one scenario, and it was at a time when my wife has disclosed that she really needed to just feel the sense of relaxation, and that video really helped. So this is very subjective and up to interpretation. But I do think there are spirits and ghosts all around us. Now, some of them trying to help us 24/7. Again, up to interpretation. Maybe I don't think so, but I do think there are instances when past loved ones can tap into our little bubbles around us, and then things can happen. Once in a while, these spirits of loved ones maybe get the ability to just be present with us. And you get really wonderful experiences, wonderful, overwhelming sense of just energy about you or something like that. It's hard to describe or put it into words. Or maybe it's God. Again, it's up to what your perspective is. But there are certain things that you can pick up on. And when it's all said and done, it can be quite spooky how possible it is that these loved ones are still with us. And sometimes they have physical abilities too. Now, have my wife and I ever felt anything paranormal since? No, never. But it doesn't dismiss the fact that something may not still be present here. And perhaps our little infant can see it and knows, at least I hope, that it's something friendly, or even someone from our family is still with us. But this is a double-edged sword. where there is light, there is dark. Not all spirits are good. Movies love to show that it's, a demon going for the baby or kid. Those Annabelle movies do a particularly good job at preaching that kind of message, but you have to make sure that you have the proper precautions, and you have to make sure that you reinforce your mind. And some individuals like to use sage, other individuals like to use other forms of spiritual combat. Combat is maybe the wrong word. Protection to reinforce and secure your home, because there are things that are trying to break through, and there are things that are trying to latch on, especially to young, innocent children. But that open and receptive brain sleeping alone at night can be a strong target for a dark spirit, like I was just saying. Now, almost everyone these days uses sound or video monitoring systems. Horror movies aside, these tools have been known to pick up on frequencies or visuals of things that shouldn't be present. And I'm talking about apparitions and other ghostly frequent vocalizations and whatnot. In one of our early encounters episodes, I had a gentleman named Nick that was on the show, and he talked about how his girlfriend's daughter, who was only a few years old at the time, was consistently greeted in their home by a man on the couch who wanted a cookie. Did they put cookies out for him? Yes, they did. And nothing happened. He ultimately thought that maybe it was the kid making it all up so they could get a cookie themselves. But the plate sat there for the whole weekend, and no one, nor the kid, had taken a cookie. So after cleansing the home with sage, the kid claimed that the man was gone, no longer there. But the kid had reinforced the idea that the man would be back eventually. I can confirm, however, that they did move out of that place, but they have had no idea since then of this possible entity status, as other people have moved in there now. So, like we mentioned before, a little tiny baby can't talk, at least in the way we can understand them as an adult. But we have discussed in the show how kids may have past lives as they reach a certain speaking threshold where they can describe certain things, either settings or photographs, names, or events that predate them, but remain familiar nonetheless. And what I'm getting at here is this individual I found who teaches educators specifically. So a lot of young mothers are involved in the classes, and on a regular basis, they'll reach out regarding any paranormal experiences the mothers might have. In doing so, they form their own conclusion that children roughly to the age of 5 have some sort of pre-existing or inside knowledge about the afterlife that we ourselves are devoid of knowing. Whether that is like on a massive qualified scale, I'm not saying that's what it is, like some scientist or professional who went to college, like, I know all this. That's the kind of knowledge that we have. No, I think it's just more so awareness. Would probably be the correct word over knowledge. If a home is formerly devoid of paranormal activity, there is a large belief backing the idea that a child being introduced into this environment could actually wake up any ghosts residing in this location, so to speak. I differ with one such case where a parent felt that their son's presence had stirred up a spirit at their in-laws' home, and I quote, "Last year, my first baby was born. My in-laws watch him when I'm at work because of COVID, and my mother-in-law had seen a man walk down the hall in their house and disappear a couple months ago. The original owners had died in the home apparently, and were elderly like my in-laws are. She also felt the bed shaking recently," end quote. Now we've mentioned pareidolia. Now that's something if you're unfamiliar with this, that's something which is basically a psychological phenomenon that causes people to see patterns or recognizable shapes in random or ambiguous visual stimuli. For example, people might see faces in objects that don't have any. And I quote, "Sometimes my daughter will talk to something that's not there, especially as she's falling asleep. But we mostly assume that's her way of winding down for the day. She's almost 2 years old now, but just the other night she did have a bad experience. And I'm not sure what happened. But just as she had been put to bed, she called out for me, and when I went into her room, thinking she simply didn't want to go to sleep, she was petrified in a little ball in the corner of her crib. The energy in there definitely felt off. She started silently crying as soon as I picked her up, which turned into a sob as we left the room. Now, she refused to go back into her room for 4 to 5 hours. It was so unlike her. I have to say, when I turned to walk out of her room, I 100% expected someone to be standing there. I haven't experienced anything like that in years, such a strong presence. The next night was like that too. I told whatever it was that it needed to leave, and then I meditated and visualized a giant bubble of protection around our home, and she's back to her old self. End quote. What's interesting about this is the fact that you are basically creating and visualizing that sense of protection around your home. That's great. There are a lot of scenarios where, again, this is not based on fact. It's based on what people are talking about and engaging with that information. So there are a lot of scenarios where something is just passing through. And as it passes through, it just latches on to what's going on in your home. And so you basically just need to, pop those shields up and just kind of keep things reinforced. And then whatever is there, it's going to keep on moving along. Energy is constantly shifting and changing on this planet and in our area of existence. And so if whatever is there, spirits, demons, apparitions, however we interpret it, there is some connection to energy involved with apparitions and ghosts. And so if they're tapping into the energy around you, then eventually that energy will shift and they'll continue moving on. But that is me being maybe a little bit on the nose, again, with my own perspective. Hopefully this information allows you to kind of form your own take on it. Now, in closing, I personally do believe babies and infants have more senses than adults. The extra data that we have presents a case in point that they can see more than adults. But as they grow, this perspective of intuition or vision becomes locked. Their neural pathways develop in favor of ones that represent our own shared reality as we get older. So by the time you have an actual full-on speaking little toddler with speech and the ability to talk, it's been introduced to them, they've learned how to communicate. That alone requires so much more mental energy, and that's going to be pulling a lot of that energy away from the available spots that they were deploying that energy to maybe be more aware with their senses and tap into certain other things. It's just the way that we're growing up. But I digress. Now, I don't want all that I have said to be a surefire thing and that the corner of the room seems to capture the focus of your infant and, oh my goodness, that means ghosts. From what I'm experiencing here, it's something that's going to require me to feel the energy of the room and the house a little bit more and be a little bit more observant and see how things go. Because from what I've seen so far, there is definitely a level of interest and a level of discontent revolving the specific room. And like I said, it could be just a kid thing, and this too could pass, but it's something I'm going to be looking into and just being aware of, because something has shifted, something has changed, and it's causing this little different dynamic inside the household. And so I'm the kind of person that wants to crack the case. Now, like I said, though, within the range of possibilities, and I mean, we've covered already that there are a lot of different possibilities for this in particular, but within the range, ghosts are absolutely an option. But sometimes it's easier for us to get spooked worse than them if we are alone and we're at night with them. We feel like we're an easy target, an easy prey, right? We're trying to rationalize something that is otherwise irrational, and you don't want to be vulnerable, especially if you're a lone single parent in the situation. But moving on from that, I quote, "My cousin's oldest child is 7 now. Back then, when he was about 1 or 2, one thing we noticed about him was he never looked right at us. I mean, when he looked at us, he actually looked at something behind us or beside us, never directly at our faces. It happened quite a bit sometimes and got to the point when my cousins thought he had eye problems, so they brought him to the hospital. After checking in with the doctor, it turned out he was fine. When he had turned 4, he started telling ghost stories, which we'd never told or heard before. Like, I saw, for example, a ghost on the ceiling. And he was scared of the staircase because a ghost lives there. Nobody in the house ever told him anything like this. Even the word ghost, he had learned himself because his parents had only mentioned the name Boogeyman to him on the odd occasion. But he will turn 8 this year, and when we asked him if he remembers the ghosts he saw when he was younger, he said no. He can't explain why, but he just knows that they were ghosts, and the house was full of ghosts at the time. End quote. Yeah, it's amazing because if you have a child who is still very much aware and in touch with this, and they get to that ability to engage in conversation and speak, and they start sharing these stories with you, that's fascinating. That goes back to the experience and the encounter that we had with Nick was on the show, like I already divulged into earlier, when his girlfriend's daughter was able to talk about the man who wanted a cookie. You get some very fascinating scenarios when you can actually talk to them and engage with them about what it is they are seeing, and they can communicate that into words. And there are individuals that think, okay, well, once a child can actually speak to it and talk about that, it helps reinforce that protection, because then you can come in and step up against whatever is causing this disturbance in your household and reinforce that barrier of protection for your family, as opposed to someone that's really, really young, can't speak, and you just have this thing taking advantage of that because they can't reach out. All they can do is cry, and the parent can just, comfort and hug and so forth. But you can't really understand, like, there is something in the room. Unless you're like me and you're thinking, hey, why are you looking at the corner? Why are you pointing up there? Why are you now all of a sudden crying and very, very much not wanting to go into your room and being uncomfortable about it? Like, there's, of course, many different factors that could cause this. But it's always good to remain open and just be aware and observe, like our kids. But on that note, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and should you wish to find more information or content, you can do so via our YouTube channel or reach out to us directly via cryptidclues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.